now introduce you to Rowan Somerville.
Thank you very much, Al-Harith. That was an amazing introduction. You can stalk me anytime. Really lovely. Can everyone hear me? Right. Thank you very much for having me. Just breathing for a moment. I'm in the heart of the beast at the moment. Starry dynamo. Here we are at the heart of Google. That's very exciting for me. I just wonder, my publisher is on holiday at the moment with 14 teenagers, and they're around 16 years old. And he said to me, not one of them has bought a book. It's incredible, isn't it? I wonder if you're responsible. But that's not fair at all, actually. But whether books continue to exist or don't, what will remain is narrative. And I've been looking at talks like TED Talks and Google Talks, trying to get an idea of what one's meant to do. And one thing they tend to do is have an argument, like there's something that I'm going to convince you of, something that I'm going to change your mind about. And that's not the way it's going to be here. If there's any ambition I have, it's simply to inspire a few ideas and thoughts. And if there's any ideology I have, I suppose it's against dualism, against this or that, right or wrong. I mean, particularly in a context like this. This is a very difficult area. Palestine, Israel, Jews, Muslims, Protestant, Catholic. You know, there's some subject matters that, I'm not talking about Protestant Catholic, but there's some subject matters that just immediately close you down and rise up the tribal hackles. And as a result of which, I've noticed that TED Talks, for instance, and lots of other things just avoid them for reasons, because people kick up fuss. But if there's any ideology I've got, it's against easy dualism, because I spent 7 or 8 years of my life looking at history. I'm not a historian. I just went and asked everyone I could find what happened. And the only thing I can tell you for sure is that history is a messy business, the closer you get to it. But when I say neither this nor that, it doesn't mean that I'm going to live in some sort of relativist world where, oh, well, we can't tell where reality is, so everything's right. No, just put your hand on your heart and you will feel it beating. And surely that's true. And mine's really beating quite hard at the moment. But surely that's a truth. Your heart, my heart, is pumping oxygenated blood through our bodies, and particularly to the brain, which is giving us this consciousness to be able to understand. That's a truth I can hold on to. But to speak about this story, because what I'm really here is to tell you a story, and as to the best of my ability, it's true. And it begins in Tel Aviv in 2001, June the 1st. Loads of young people are standing outside a nightclub. And I mean young, they're teenagers. It's teen night outside. It's teen night at the nightclub in the Dolphinarium in Tel Aviv. It's a warm, beautiful night. They're all gathering in order to get inside. And most of these people are former, they've come from the former Soviet Union. And their parents have emigrated as a result of Israel's efforts to bring more people of with some sort of Jewish connection into Israel. And these are their sons and daughters. And they are all together on this night to have, you know, a brilliant night's dancing, kissing, who knows what will happen. There is one person there who's a little bit older. He's 22. His name is Saeed Hatari, and he's not from the former Soviet Union. He's from a place 14 kilometers away. He's never been to Tel Aviv before that moment. He's looking around with wonder, I imagine. And just before 11 o'clock, the doors of the nightclub open. And most of the boys are letting the girls go in free, because girls get in free before 11. And at the point at which the crowd is at its most dense, Saeed Hatari screams the name of his God and sets off a bomb packed with shrapnel and ball bearings, immediately killing 22 people, 23 if we include him, and injuring hundreds. And the devastation is appalling. And I've spent a long time looking at the photographs and whatever. And the only thing I can say is that the cement area literally runs with blood. This sets off what is called a mass casualty incident. It's a sad reflection on Israel's recent history. Israel only has a recent history. That Israel's probably better than any other country in dealing with a mass casualty incident. That's where emails go out, all the telephone communications are cleared, texts immediately go to doctors, parking is cleared in areas, high school volunteers are there to push trolleys around. It's amazingly organised, and all the nearby hospitals are alerted. A man called Dror Sofer is the trauma specialist who's in charge of the nearest hospital, and he starts dealing with the extraordinary number of horribly injured teenagers who are arriving. Now let's just look at how they're injured. Blast. Blast is the modern expression of warfare. At one stage we were throwing rocks at each other, we made weapons, iron weapons, bronze weapons, swords, arrows, muskets, rifled guns. Today it's basically blast. Bullets aren't over, but it's basically blast. And the nature of blast is it has a peculiar pattern of injury. Not to go into it too much, but just so you hear and understand a bit about it, primary blast injury is from the blast wave. And that will attack like anything with fluid in it, your eyes, your ears, digestive areas. It's very, very difficult to deal with medically. Then there's secondary blast injury. That accounts for 85% of blast. That's all the shrapnel and whatever. And it goes on and on. There's an air blast that can blow things off. The injuries are enormous and varied, and they need a large selection of medical specialties, all at once sometimes. Trauma specialists, burn specialists, I can hardly ever pronounce it, but otolaryngologists, ocular specialists, you know, a large number of different specialties are all there, sometimes on the same patient. And if we go another of the hospitals nearby, there is a man who I'm going to focus on called Yaakov Lavi, and he's a cardiologist. He's a cardiac surgeon. And like so many Israelis, but particularly a cardiac surgeon, he hasn't really looked at the time at all the historical, looked at the political situation. He's just focused on being a cardiac surgeon. He's a nice guy. He is very, the word pro-Palestinian isn't quite right, but he's very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. He's a left-winger, but he's not involved in everything, because one of the things that isn't generally used in post-blast, what's generally not needed, is heart surgery. Heart surgery is pretty much a peacetime activity unless you get something in your heart. And so he, who is used to being the center of activity, is sitting there with his hands, his head in his hands, experiencing what he described to me as rage. Because standing there, there are teenagers coming in with battlefield injuries. And just down from where he is a ward he's responsible for, which is full of all the end-stage cardiac patients, people waiting for a heart transplant. Now I'm going to stop with this horrific scene that you can imagine across 4 or 5 hospitals around Tel Aviv. And let's just go a few hours later to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is only 40 kilometers away, 44 kilometers away. I mean, I thought when I went to that part of the world, I imagined it would be much bigger because of the sheer concentration of narratives, let alone the biblical ones I was given growing up. But then all the modern ones, it's tiny. It's the size of Wales, pretty much. There in Jerusalem, let's see a man called Mazen al-Jilani. He's a Palestinian. He lives in East Jerusalem. He's got absolutely nothing to do with what happened the night before. What he has to do with is his 3 children, his wife, being a pharmacist, trying to live a normal life, particularly difficult as a Palestinian amidst the Second Intifada in East Jerusalem. He wakes up, says goodbye to his kids, goes to work, has his whole day, no doubt hearing about the horrific bomb that happened the night before. On his way back home, he does the equivalent of stopping off for a pint. He goes and has a cup of tea with his mates at the cafe. Everyone goes in to watch the news. Mazen al-Jilani's been hearing the news all day. Maybe he sits outside, maybe he's smoking a cigarette, maybe he's drinking a cup of tea. A car draws up and a man gets out. The witnesses say it was an Israeli settler. He walks up to Mazen al-Jilani, he doesn't know him, and he shoots him in the neck. as a random reprisal for what had happened the night before. A few hours later, Mazen al-Jilani is lying in a hospital bed. His family's all around him. There's massive bandages around his neck. But otherwise, the heart monitor is going beep, 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 and he looks okay. And a doctor is telling his family that he's dead, but his heart is beating. And the doctor's saying, yeah, but he's brain dead. Outside the room is a transplant coordinator. She has the exquisitely difficult task of going to the family, who a few hours ago, their son, their husband, their father, their brother was fine, and asking for his heart. That's hard under normal circumstances. If it happens in Dublin, if it happens wherever, but there in Jerusalem, in the midst of the Second Intifada, where it was culturally pressured to not help the other side on any level at all, it's very, very difficult indeed. But the thing about a heart transplant, as opposed to, say, the kidney, you can get the kidney out of a recently dead person, no problem. A heart needs a still beating donor. And that makes it very, very rare, because only about 2% of deaths are going to be brain damage deaths, or deaths that would allow a still beating donor. And then you've got to get the heart when the person is seemingly still alive. They are alive. I mean, until 1967, when the first heart transplant was done, the definition of life was your beating heart. Just because your brain's scrambled doesn't mean that you're not alive. I mean, a tree doesn't have a brain, and it is alive. But what the transplant coordinator said was that she didn't have anything to do. She went up, and Mazen's mum said, take the heart. And she knew it was going to an Israeli Jew, the tribe that, as far as she was concerned, had killed her husband. Not all the Jews everywhere, but as far as it was, within the context of her mind. But she said it doesn't matter whether it's a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim, it doesn't matter who it is, just save someone else's life. So go back to Yaakov Lavi, our cardiac surgeon. He's still sitting there with his hand in his head. The phone rings. It's Tamar Ashkenazi, who's the head of the transplant, who goes, we've got a heart for Yitzhak Cohen. Now, Lavi got to know all the people in the end stage heart unit, because although Israel has the ability, the know-how, the technical surgical expertise, incredibly high standards of medicine, and the money to offer its citizens heart transplants, there's an acute shortage of hearts. One of the reasons is because, as I was already describing, they are rare. On the other reason, there was the problem that about 10% of the population could be described as ultra-Orthodox. It's people with the hats and the locks, and they want the hearts if they need them, but also religiously they say they can't be donors, so that brings down the percentage as well. There's lots of difficult things. And then in this country, in the UK, in France, there's a special thing, and if you had a heart and it didn't, you couldn't find anywhere for it to go, it would go to a nearby country, but Israel's nearby countries are not going to send them hearts. They're going to send them shells, missiles, whatever. So there's an acute shortage of hearts. And here is a man, Yitzhak Cohen, who Lavi, the surgeon, has got to know pretty well. And he's dying slowly. And he admitted to me, with his characteristic, this is a wide brush of the stroke, but characteristic Israeli bluntness. And he goes, yeah, I was looking at the newspapers, checking out tragedies, wondering if there'd be a heart for me before I die. He's got 2 kids. He knows which way he's going. He can hardly walk anymore. And what's he wanting? It's not so bad. He just wants to survive. I mean, I think it's 16th century, the great philosopher Spinoza tried to find, is there anything that links all living beings? And he came up with Proposition 7. It pertains of an organism to exist. We all want to exist, and that's all Yitzhak Cohen wanted to do. Yigal Cohen wanted to do was exist. And guess what? His heart is there for him. Mazen al-Jilani's family is giving his heart. And Lavi comes in and he goes, Cohen, I've got a heart for you. And immediately this sets off a whole set of different things that kick in. He immediately tells his family, stops eating, he gets prepped, and then another group of surgeons goes off to Jerusalem to extract the heart, a cardiectomy. this is something I've witnessed, and it's a really harsh thing to watch, because there's a patient at the beginning, and at the end, they're lying there, a corpse with their chest open, as if vultures have been there. But it's an amazing act of generosity, you know, to give. Anyway, what happens from then on is what is probably the most dramatic medical thing that I know of, which is a heart transplant. So the one team goes off. Lavi is there with Cohen, who is now sedated, and he's in constant contact with the team that's taking it out. They don't know that the heart is good until they actually open up the chest and look at it. Is anyone really squeamish? I have friends. Oh, you are. That was what I meant. Yeah. So I won't go into too many details, but you can't tell it's really good until you look at it. And then Lavi isn't going to open up the chest of Cohen until he knows it's worth doing. And then he'll attach Cohen's diseased heart to a heart bypass machine. But he won't take it out. And he'll get the call saying the heart looks good, and then it zooms over and he just waits for an hour. And there's just one thing to do. He's not going to snip out the heart until he's got the new one next to him, because there's no going back at that stage. When he has the new one next to him, he opens the box, he looks at it, checks it, and then he makes the 5 cuts on the 5 great vessels, if I can remember them: superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, aorta, pulmonary vein, pulmonary artery, I think that's 5, takes it out and puts in the new heart. And then sews, and the last one being the aorta, and at a certain point then you release the cross clamp, and blood fills in. Now, just before he does that, he's picked up the one heart, he's taken out the other one, and he has something like what do you call it? Suddenly, a secular epiphany, like a religious moment. And he just gets on with his work, puts the heart, releases the cross clamp, the heart fills with blood, and as occasionally happens, it just starts on his own. And he seals up the patient, and Cohen's got a healthy heart in him, and he walks out of the operating theatre through the emergency room still full of horribly injured teenagers. And there are loads of press because of the bomb and this, that, and the other. And they turn and look at him and ask him for a comment, and he says, just an hour ago I had the heart of an Israeli Jew in one hand and a heart of a Palestinian Muslim in the other, and there is no difference. Now, that is what brought me to this story. And I was making documentaries at the time, or sitting in a horrible office in London, and I first heard about the bomb. Now, we hear about bombs a lot. I mean, so much so that we're desensitized to them. Did you know that in northern Syria on Wednesday there was a bomb in a marketplace that killed 38 people? Worse than this one. We just let it pass because we can't survive that way. And I'd been that way about like Israelis or this or that. You just don't look at it. They're not my people. I've just not going to. But something about this one, this bomb, got me. Maybe because I was the age where I liked going to nightclubs. I was a DJ. I played records here and there. I could feel for those people just waiting to dance and just imagine that terrible moment. And then when I heard about the heart transplant the next day, it fell on me, as Larkin said, as they say love does, like an enormous yes. And it gripped me. And I'm not really telling you the whole story. I'm missing out a key part, which you brought up there. When I was a child and I opened the fridge in our family house, my 3 brothers and sisters and my parents, always on the top shelf, generally, there were human hearts, or bits of hearts. And my parents weren't serial killers, they were cardiologists. And we take it for granted now. It used to be the case, 50s, 60s, that the number 1 killer of people in the developed world was heart disease. That's what knocked you off. And because of cardiologists like my parents, pioneering cardiologists, it isn't anymore. So just to give you a statistic, I think 15% of children born with heart defects in the early 60s only 15% made it past into adulthood. And now we're looking at 90 to 95%, so that's a very radical change, usually living until 70. So that's what happened there. And when my mother, whose patients were generally children, when she lost a child, she'd go and get the heart. And she'd be with that heart until she understood why it had ceased to function. On the other side as well, so there you've got hearts going, you know, all the conversations I heard between my parents were about aortic stenosis, left ventricular thrombosis. I grew up amongst that. I saw the hearts there. The surgeons were always around the house smoking furiously because it was only in the 70s they found out it was bad. You know what they did when they found out how bad it was? All those people, furious smokers, they just stopped. Like overnight, my dad smoked his whole life. Read one article in the Lancet, it's like, this isn't worth it. Yes, so there, on that side, that was why hearts were so key to me. On the other side, our neighbor was a very inspiring, maybe even saintly man called Rabbi Grin, who was the head of the Reformed Jews in London, and his children were all our age, and so we were very close on that side. And yet on the other side, my father spoke Arabic. He was an Irishman who'd learned Arabic. And my mother was passionately involved in the Palestinian cause. So there were Arabs around, there were Jews around, there were Muslims. People didn't know so much Arabic. I already spoke 30 words of Arabic by the time I was 8 or 9. And, you know, I still hang out in a dish-dash galabir at home. So there were these things, so that when I heard this news, you can see why it gripped me so much and became the focus of my life, because this heart that moved between a Palestinian Muslim and an Israeli Jew, it felt like to me it could maybe heal the world. And I just followed it. So I went to Israel, I went to the West Bank, I spent a long time there. I spoke to all the people who were outside the Dolphinarium who I could find. I spoke to the brothers and sisters, the parents. I spoke to everyone I could. I spent a long time there. But there were two key things that I needed to understand that eluded me for a while. One was Said Hatari, this young man. If you read all the newspaper articles, it said that he was a fanatical Muslim, believed in the whole virgins thing. I mean, a load of rubbish, actually. And if you know, but it was this idea of this other than human person who'd done this. You know, and he'd done it for other than, you know, fanatical reasons. And so I wanted to understand, is that who he was? Was he a psychopath to be able to do that appalling thing in a bunch of teenagers? So I needed to go and find out and meet his parents and meet everyone. Now, if you're a foreign correspondent, the way you will do that, a proper journalist, which I have never been, but I'm always open to an offer from a newspaper, what you do when you get to somewhere like that is you hire a fixer. And the fixer, you pay $250, $300, $400, $500 a day, and you tell them what you want, and they get you the article, they get you the interview, and you get your quotes, and everything moves forward happily. It's not what I wanted. I mean, this is an act of terrorism. It comes from the Latin terreo, I frighten. You know, without the aspect of performance, it's just a violent crime. And that aspect of performance that comes in is where the media plays its part. Not very many newspapers, TV shows, clicks, you know, onto stories have been done through the cause of peace. You know, many of them are done through the cause of fear and war. It's not that they're cynical. Everyone's just getting through the day somehow for whatever people are interested in. And this whole performance activity, I wanted to get away with. Get away from. There's a sort of pattern that happens after a terrorist bomb, or there was, you know, the journalists go to the victims who say what terrible, you know, there's such sadness and awful, and then they go to the family members who go, my son or daughter's a martyr, and then they go to, you know, there's a whole Hamas who goes this. I just wanted, I wasn't after information, I wanted a feeling type thing. And since I'd worked in the Big Breakfast, Channel 4's breakfast program years ago, which was a TV show. My only contact were the people who worked on the Palestinian version of Sesame Street. So I turn up and I'm there and I'm chatting. They don't know me, but they're really lovely. And then they're having their production meeting. And after the production meeting, I go and ask them. They said, so how can we help you? And I said, look, I've got this phone number. I think it's the father of the suicide bomber. And I've been told I can't call it under any circumstances because he doesn't want to hear an English voice. It's going to freak him out. So can anyone help me? And they're all going, we don't want any trouble. You know, this was a Hamas thing. It's a dangerous area. Everything is peaceful here, but it turns like that. Is there any other element to it? And I said, you know, I'm not very politically sophisticated. I have no idea. I'm just here. I came on the bus, you know. I'm so staying in the hotel up there. You tell me. I just want to go and see him. So one of them goes, Saleh, come. They have a whole chat, and some young guy goes, come outside. So we go outside. We're there. By the way, they're having the production meeting in a bar. This is in Muslim-Palestine. Everyone is drinking pints of Tayyib beer, a Palestinian beer. It's just nothing is what you expect, you know, in life. I'm not sure what their backgrounds are. Anyway, we go outside. He makes a phone call, and he's talking, and he goes, it's okay. Tomorrow at 11, you meet him. So I have the address. He's written it down. I said, by the way, why did they ask you? He said, everyone says I speak Arabic beautifully. And off he goes. So I have this, so I just go in a cab, you know. And Kalkilia isn't the most relaxed place in all this. And I've got no backing at all, you know. I don't have a newspaper behind me. I don't have anything behind me. And I don't know what the situation is. So my cab driver, for instance, he says when I get in that he knows where it is. And then we're driving along, and he turns around and he goes, where? And I said, I don't know, I've never been here before. And he's seeming really antsy. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what's going on here? I was going to ask someone, but there's no one around. And then we see a car, and we stop it. And there's a black BMW, and the guy gets out. And I'm thinking, everyone, what's going on here? And the guy has a chat, and we drive. And then he turns around, the driver again, he goes, where? I said, well, didn't that guy tell you? He goes, well, I don't know. Go, I leave you. And everything is getting a bit weird, and he seems very anxious not to be there. So I call the father of the suicide bomber. His name was Saeed Hatari, the boy, and his father's Abu Hatari, father of Hatari. And I pass it to the taxi driver, and they have a 10-minute chat. And then he puts down the phone and goes, where? Eventually, I remember that we passed two people standing, and they were the only two people, and I drive him back there, and it's Abu Hatari who's standing there. And this guy just wants to get paid and leave. So I don't know if their 10-minute chat is driving around the block while we sharpen the knives. I don't know what the scenario is at all. Or, more likely, his wife's cooking his favorite lunch. He's got a guitar practice. He can't wait to get this job. You don't know in this whole thing. Because one thing's for sure, I meet him. We have an extraordinary few hours together, about 5 or 6 hours. They're not that easy because no one speaks English. He's asked me where I bought my translator. Every decent journalist brings the translator. I've just taken whatever lead I've got, and I've arrived hoping someone will speak English. And when he says, where's your translator? I lie like a child, and I go, sorry, I thought you had one. Like, you know, it's like a kid who's meant to have done his homework, and the teacher goes, where's your homework? And the kid's showing him a blank page going, but it was there, sir. Anyway, we managed to get someone to turn up, but I spend hours in a room with Hatari and a guy with a scar from here right across here. Not an injury that's done in a domestic accident in any way, and not something that makes me feel very at home. And in the middle of the time when we're just waiting, I suddenly think, oh my God, I've got to turn off the Find My iPad app on my iPad in case the Israeli Secret Services send a drone to get revenge on these people. I don't know what's going on here. And then at one point, the door opens, and there are women in the kitchen who never come out, and a little toddler comes out. And the toddler's really making everything feel better, taking all my dirty laundry out, you know, which is really embarrassing because it's super clean culture. Everyone's in really nice time, you know. And then I go, I wanted to show what a nice guy I am. Oh, yeah, what's his name? And Hatari goes, Osama. And I say, oh, that's really funny. You think he's making a joke, Osama? And he's going, no, that is his name. It's not a joke at all. But actually, as time goes on, we end up having a really good communication, and I find two important things out. One, his son was not particularly religiously committed. Two, he was also, his father complained about the fact that he was in no way interested in the struggle. He wasn't even interested, his father said, in Palestinian liberation. So I said, so what actually is causing this? Well, it's another whole long story, what the cause is, and longer than I can go into here. But what was true, for sure, is that the picture of him was not accurate. that we had received in the press, be it the Washington Post, the New York Times, the BBC. We were given an incorrect thing because it's too difficult what the reality is. And I'm not going to go into the reality right now, but we could in questions if you wanted to. The second thing that I really wanted to go into, that I really needed to know, I was obsessed with speaking to the guy who'd received the Palestinian heart, Yigal Cohen. I couldn't, every time I tried to find him, no one could tell me where he was, and normally things were available. And then when I spoke to the surgeon again and said, look, I really want to find Cohen, he said he doesn't want to speak about it at all. He's just trying to lead his life and get on with it. And I said, but maybe you could call him up for me. And he's going, no, he doesn't want to speak. And then I pulled my parent card out. I said, by the way, my mum is so-and-so and my dad is so-and-so. And he goes, really? They're cardiologists there? I was going, go on, please call. All you can see is you can say no. And he goes, he's not going to do it. I said, Yaakov, you put the heart in his chest. He's going to do whatever you ask him. And he did. He said, fine, go on. And so I was on my way to go and see Cohen, this man who had the Palestinian heart. And I suppose it was sort of romantic and ippy-dippy because, I don't know, I've looked at a lot of heart transplant stories, and I've also been at a heart transplant. And there's a lot of chat about organ memory. Are you familiar with this? You know, the idea that when you transplant an organ, memories come with it. And, you know, there was a man in the US who's 57 years old, blue-collar worker from a completely white area. He knew that he'd received the heart of a young African-American guy who had been killed in a gang shootout. That's what he knew. But when he got the heart, he suddenly became obsessed with classical music. He became utterly obsessed with classical music. How was he to know that the young African-American guy was a violinist on his way to violin practice, who gets shot by a random bullet from some maniacs, 200 yards down the road? Those sorts of things, and there's lots of them, made me think about, organ memory maybe being truer than you might expect. But then I asked Sir Magdi Yacoub, who's one of the great heart surgeons. He said it's total rubbish. He said after a heart transplant, you get very strong immunosuppressant drugs. They have a psychotropic side effect. It changes your personality. But then I asked a woman called Susan Vosloo. She's probably done more heart transplants than Sir Magdi Yacoub. And she said, oh, I don't know, I believe it a bit. And she told me this story about a patient of hers who was an incredibly shy girl who received the heart, she didn't know, of a model. And she said after she would walk around like she was beautiful. And she said, look, I saw that with my own eyes. And then her husband, who's in the background, who's an anaesthetist, says, yeah, but Susan, you read the astrology charts, yeah? So what I mean is there's no way of knowing. But I was filled with like a sense of what would happen. And when I'm going to have to wrap up quickly. I've got another 20 minutes to go, but we can't do it. When I did see him, he played super nice about how wonderful it is. I have the heart of a Palestinian in me, and it's all great and lovely, and everything's lovely. And he's a really nice man, but sick and struggling with all that. And a classic sabra. It's like an Israeli word for someone's. Sabra is a fruit with a hard outside, spiky outside, and really soft inside. And that was what he was, totally direct. But then at a certain point, I was about to leave, and he goes, "So who's hiring you? Which paper?" I said, "I'm not a journalist, no paper." What are you doing? I said, "Well, I'm writing a book." "So who is buying the book?" And I said, "Well, no one." And he goes, "So it's a hobby?" And I was like, it was too close to the truth, but, it's like, "Oh, no, I'm a writer." And I go, "Well, that's not a hobby," but it's a hobby. You get paid, it's real, it's a hobby. I said, and as soon as he said this, he kind of let down his guard. And I really wished I'd left before then, because at some point he said to me, this guy, I'm fine with the Palestinians who are here, but most of them just want to kill Jews. And I said, "What?" But the Arabs, they just want to kill Jews. I mean, the Palestinians, yeah, they're okay, but, And I said, "But you've got a Palestinian heart beating in your body." He's going, "It's a pump. They didn't know it was going to a Jew." And I left, and it felt like my whole world was falling apart. And when we get to the happier bit, we don't have time for the happier bit, unfortunately. I went and saw my mum, and my mum showed me a photograph of a newspaper clipping of her in 1967 as a cardiologist, and she's got a baby, and it says, first heart transplant in Britain. And I was going, oh, wow, is that the baby who got the heart? And she goes, no. I said, so what's wrong with the baby? She said, baby eats too much, generally very greedy, but the baby is you. I'm holding you outside the first heart transplant, And this led me to a whole other line where I started looking at the first heart transplant that ever happened, that I'm going to have to be very quick with, which was in apartheid South Africa. Christian Barnard transplanted a heart into, a woman called Denise Dovell into a man called Phil Washkansky. But what's less known is that before that, he was about to transplant a heart from another man who was black. And the apartheid authorities said, no, you can't do this. Because apartheid, or apartheid, what does it actually mean, is separateness. It was a legal representation of racism, and in order for it to exist, there had to be an absolute provable difference between the races. And so he wasn't allowed to do it. Fine to do cross-gender, not fine to cross-race. But once he'd done that, the first heart transplant, he became the most famous man in the world, and nothing could stop him. And so his second transplant was between a black man and a white man. And suddenly, you had this fellow, Phil Blayberg, with a black heart. A heart from a black man. And for the first time, that heart was allowed to sit on a whites-only bench. For the first time, that heart was allowed to go somewhere. And what does that really mean? We're moving into the symbolic. There was a corrosive symbol of the power, of the ridiculousness of any ideology, especially apartheid, that sought to show, one race was different to another in such a way. And I suppose that when it comes down to it, what we're left with is there are no easy solutions. The lovely, graceful symbol that I had sort of fell apart in some ways, but it sort of sticks as well. The act of mercy of giving the heart, the fact that, the heart can go from one to the other, the fact that all these divisions are created, they're not as essential as that bead. I'm going to have to stop now in case you're not going to have time for questions. If there are no questions, I could go on.
I'll ask the first question or two before we open out into the audience questions. So you've described your initial reaction to seeing the reports of the bombing and your own background. What did, when you decided that you needed to know more and to research this, what was the reaction of your publicist or your family? And
my publisher, my agent told me that I shouldn't write that book because it would have... it wouldn't be commercially viable. It was too difficult and complicated an area. And the reality of trying to publish this book, it's not that easy to get a book that's critical of Israel in any form published in the United States. It's, the book I hope, sincerely hope is balanced. But it wasn't saying, oh, this is a great idea for your...
Okay, they weren't very encouraging.
And reality's played that out.
Yeah, okay. You've described in some of your interviews as being maybe a little bit naive when you're asking certain questions of people. And as you've just shared with our audience, you weren't particularly politically knowledgeable. Do you think that naivety served you? Maybe you wouldn't have done this if you hadn't felt that, been like that?
I don't think naivety ever really serves you. I think that I thought I went with no preconceptions. One of the things I realized when I got to Israel is that I was a little bit anti-Israeli.
Okay.
I certainly have never been anti-Semitic, but I realized when I was in Israel for a few weeks, hold on a minute. And if you are anti-Israeli, you're against that kid over there and that grandma over there, and it's no better than, it's no more acceptable than being anti-Irish.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so then, because we hear so many critical things and it doesn't help anyone, there isn't a single Palestinian who's wise who wants you to be anti-Israeli.
Okay, so you became aware of their biases.
I became aware of, my own rubbish.
Okay, very good. So I'll ask one more question before we go to the audience. And if you do have a question, hang on till we get a microphone to you. You've got my one or one over here, I think. So the opening chapter of Beat, you describe in lots of detail the teenagers and the young security guard that are there, how much of what you share with us is based on interviews with their family or their surviving friends, and how much of it is your imagination, like the point of view that you've shared, of their point of view?
The opening chapter of the book was the hardest one to research because this describes the teenagers just before the bomb. And what I did do was make sure that nothing I said, if they were having a conversation about something, it was because someone had told me they'd been talking about that. Okay. Where I mentioned that someone had just had an argument with her dad about her hot pants, it's because that happened. Yeah. Even the fluorescent coloured...
The nail varnish that the grandmother didn't
like. The dreams,
like.
everything. Because for me, that chapter was the most important because I wanted it to be a memorial to these people, not as victims, but as the young humans that they were with their life stolen off them. And I still, to this day, can't talk about it without almost crying, you know, because I've got so close to them and their families and all those people. And it's worth saying one thing that isn't part of your question. The aim of this bomb was to make all those former Soviet Union people feel, you know, that they weren't welcome in Israel, that this wasn't for them. Actually, what it did was it wedded them to the country in a much stronger way. And it helped create the war that we see now. Yeah. It wasn't useful.
Okay, thank you. Have we any questions? Oh, in the front row we have our first question.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hello.
And thank you for the talk, really interesting. So my question was actually about the way things are portrayed in journalism. So you said that the way the suicide bomber was written about in the media was not really an accurate picture of reality. And I mean, I find that as well when we read in the news, that sometimes you're not really sure what to really believe in what frame they are putting it out there. What do you think about that when you, as a writer who are looking for the truth, when you are reading news stories about other attacks or events, do you have any pre-bias in terms of the truth to it?
Of course, we all have pre-bias, and what we have to do is try and analyse and be honest about that. There's no getting away from that. But in terms of, for instance, the idea, you know, one of the big ideas was that, was this whole thing of the virgins, you know, and for me, encoded in that was an implicitly racist idea of the Arab other. You know, this kind of sexual devianty type thing, which is it's because when you create that kind of image that is dehumanizing, I mean, think of the kind of Nazi anti-Semitic picture of the kind of, you know, terrible old Jew. It's all to make it, take away humanity so that you don't deal with the real situations. It's a real foe against understanding, all those things. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't any basis to loads of those things, and especially as ISIS has shown, there's lots of people who do believe, you know, in the whole thing, but it's just the way things are used. It's very, very unhelpful, and, you know, we need to get closer to the situation, not deal with these caricatures. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, lovely question. Do we have got one over here? Thanks, Maria.
Sorry, there's two. Can I come to you after?
Thank you so much. I'm very curious about when you went to meet the bomber's father, and you said that he was talking about his son, and he said that his son is A, not very political, and B, not even very religious, and you said that there was a long story behind it, and maybe you can discuss that in the questions. Can you talk a bit more about this particular interaction? How did the father see the situation? How did he feel? How did you feel?
The father was trying to be as well the political, you know, there's a tremendous thing about being, when there's absolutely nothing, to be a relation of the shaheed, the martyr, is something that gives you status, and there's certain things that he was pretending to be that person, or that persona for a while. But then as time passed, he was actually a grieving parent. He had no idea, I believe, very thoroughly, he wasn't in the country. He had no idea that his son was going to do that, and he would have thrown himself in front of a bus to stop it. And in fact, the hardest moment of questioning happened when I saw him as a grieving parent, and he had tears in his eyes, and I asked him cruelly, actually, and because I thought I had a responsibility to the parents of the victims, I said, you know, you feel so much pain for your son's loss. Do you ever think of the mothers and fathers of the people he's killed, because they feel the same pain as you? And he went mental. And I was going to have to kind of run. And what was I doing? I was like a teenager kicking at a scar. You know, it didn't help anything. It was ill placed. What had happened? How? Now, I'm not answering your question, I'm afraid, and that is, how did he become a suicide bomber, really? It's the most dangerous question I could ask there. And every time I did, things got really dangerous, and even to the point that I had to get sort of smuggled out of Calcutta by someone because I was asking that question and I wanted to know. My opinion, not based on fact, is that what happens is that there are professionals who look for certain sort of people who are vulnerable and available and angry and desperate, and they make out of them a weapon. Because they don't have sophisticated missiles, they have burning kites, but what they do have access to is the most sophisticated guidance system in existence, the human brain. And what they do is make a weapon out of that. That's my belief.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Thank you. It's a great question. We're out of time, unfortunately. So, just to close, what is...
Sorry.
What's
She
coming...
gave up her question.
Well, we can ask afterwards. What's next for you? Are you researching something else at the moment? When can we invite you back in to hear about your next book?
I'm very interested in religion. I've been looking at Scientology. I've been looking at lots of different religions. I was very much educated, a strict Roman Catholic. I was brought up by Jesuits. I believe that most religions are entirely invented. I want to examine this, not as a skeptic, not as a cynic, and I want to write a novel about a religion that really works, one that really does give you enlightenment.
Okay, great. Look forward to reading it. Thank you again for coming in to talk to us today, Rowan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.